David, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
Very, very well. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for accepting. Today, we're going to talk about what's the value of rankings these days. And I'm curious to what you'll have to say about rankings, especially as someone who's an ambassador of a couple of one or two ranking tools. So I want to hear your point of view on this topic. Now, David, as I like to do with all my SEO guests, I like to ask them how they became an SEO professional in the first place. So with that said, what led you, because I'm sure you have an interesting story on this also, to become an SEO professional?
Yeah, so, I've been doing it now almost 17 years. Actually, I even started well before that. I used to help my dad's site optimize that in Google, which was basically very simple back then, working in front page. You'd change a few items of text. You'd even change the last published date at the bottom. To get pushed back up into the search engines again. The old web crawlers,
yeah, good old days.
Web Wombat. Yes. So life was easy back then. Then I took a bit of a career path, did a few other things, and then as sort of even covered the interview with Barry Swartz, which came out yesterday, which we did back in I think April when I was in New York. It was one of those things where I was, my mum's business was struggling, and the whole thing was like, well, how hard can this be? So I taught myself Google Ads, Google Analytics, built a web page, registered an exact match domain, and all of a sudden my mum started having inquiries coming to a business. So yes, kind of went from there. Sorry, I'm not sure if those sounds come through. Let's quit out of that. Sorry, just Teams. Yeah, so it was very much kind of helping my family business, did some more stuff on my dad's site, and then ended up actually losing my job, which was a great sort of start. I think that's how a lot of people kind of get the entrepreneurial bug. Mm-hmm. And the annoying thing about that is before I lost my job, I was asked by the company I was working for to train one of their salespeople on this SEO thing that they're selling to clients. So I don't think it's changed a lot. A lot of companies selling in SEO services don't actually understand what they're selling.
Oh, yeah.
But then I was like, well, okay, might as well just work for myself. But it was very, I guess, a stressful period of time. I was unemployed. I was lucky enough to get a new business grant. So I was supported at a very basic level for the first year. But when I started talking to a lot of agencies, they were very much, I was living in Brisbane, Australia at the time. They were like, well, you have to move to Sydney or Melbourne. And the money they were offering was like, I think it was like $25,000 to $30,000, and I was actually making more than that working in a call center. So I was like, well, something's not right. I know they're charging this work out $100, $150 an hour, and yet they only want to pay me $15, $20 an hour, which I could also make more money working in a bar. So I made the decision to kind of work for myself. Did that for a couple of years. It was a struggle. Did some sort of in-house sort of contract roles, which I think helped a lot. And then sort of made the decision that I need to sort of accelerate my technical skills, and the only way to do that was to sort of move in-house. So I ended up getting a job with a comparison engine, but I actually overspent my budget and was actually terminated in that role, which was another rude awakening. So I went back and doing some freelance stuff for a while, for a couple of agencies, and then I ended up moving to a development agency. But one of the things I realized with the development agency, and it hasn't changed a lot, SEO is not an important thing for a lot of website builds. It's the last thing. It's a tick box on the way out. Mm-hmm. Even other stuff, it was, websites were launched without Google Analytics, even though the, developers had signed the tick and flick list, that they've done all the checks. So I did that for about a year. I massively increased my, technical skills, but also understood a lot of things which break when migrations happen or when new website builds happen. Then moved to agency, Razorfish in Melbourne, which was, a really good team. And the advantage of that was we had a single client. So we had a lot of focus on making sure we got the best results for that client. And then I made the decision to move to Amsterdam to join eBay Classifieds Group, as a SEO product manager, which again further accelerated my technical skills. And then from there, went to London, joined an agency, decided I didn't like agencies, moved back in-house into, again, an SEO product role again with Shipstead Media Group, and then moved back to Amsterdam to work for Danone as a global traffic manager, and then was invited to join Reckitt, where I am now, and I've been there, I think, been over 2.5 years. So head of search, in charge of both paid and organic channels. So a bit of a whirlwind, but I guess that one of the key things which I did learn when you're working for yourself, you have the ability to focus on things which you think have an impact. So again, you know, if I'd started from an agency, I'd be taught how to do things very cookie cutter, but I potentially wouldn't have had enough time and experience learning about Google Ads and Google Analytics and understanding attribution modeling and very much QA. Because again, when I was working for myself, I had to do all the QA. So if we did a Google Analytics implementation, I was the one who had to do all the QA to work out, you know, whether pixels firing correctly, whether capturing the right information. And I did work with a couple other companies over the years, which I've stayed in touch with. One was an analytics company in India, Tatvic, and they wrote some custom script, which allow us to do a lot more advanced things that weren't possible in analytics at the time. So very much an interesting career. I think, as I said, working for yourself was an interesting part of my development. Again, you know, it's one of the things a lot of people now moving from working agencies or in-house to working for themselves.
Yeah.
But I don't think a lot of kind of estimate how much stress is actually involved.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, so that's the background. But how about yourself? How did you get into, I guess, your interest in search or your focus on search?
So the long and short of it is I studied music tech at uni, started looking to be a publisher, online music publisher. I came across an ad one day that said earn money using MySpace. This was, of course, during the MySpace era. Clicked on it and it introduced me to affiliate marketing. That introduced me to digital marketing, which introduced me to SEO. And SEO, I just naturally gravitated to it because I thought it was the most creative channel out of all of them. And I remember keywords particularly was an area that I found absolutely fascinating. I mean, this was, you know, before we had Keyword Planner and we had Keyword Tool, I think it was, but it was essentially better, in my opinion, better, more accurate data. And you can literally search for something and see more or less exactly the demand for it. And the whole idea of getting traffic that way just captivated me. Keywords, speaking of, is an interesting area of SEO. Now, some SEOs they have the opinion that keywords, targeting keywords, remains and will always be a fundamental aspect to attaining traffic via organic search. Others see it more as an area of SEO that's more or less fading away slightly. What is your overall take on the targeting of keywords?
I think it's generally something that's harder. So again, you know, back in the day, 2009 or so, you'd add a page to a website, you'd get some traffic. One of the top search terms for a business I was working for back then was a misspelling of Sydney accommodation because people can't spell accommodation. And that was before Google kind of rolled up a lot of that in the kind of the did you mean autocorrection stuff. But back then it was probably, I think, about 10 to 20% of the total volume for Sydney accommodation was a typo, which again was very easy to rank for. So I think it's very much kind of, you know, it has got a lot harder, but again, you know, there's a lot more information that you have nowadays, in terms of, you know, you've got various tools, whether it's, you know, Rank Ranger or SEMrush or Systrix or Keyword Insights. You have a lot of tools that give you a lot more information. They give you the estimated commercial intent of a keyword. They give you, you know, where does keyword sit in the consumer funnel. They can tell you what keyword might cost potentially, because again, you had to do all that stuff manually in the past. And there's also other aspects such as, you know, they can tell you what other rich snippets show. if you're ranked for, London accommodation, there's going to be map packs, there might be some videos, there might be some text-based content, there might be some FAQs. So I think generally there's a lot more data and insights available to marketers, and getting the information very quickly attained. So, no matter within, hours you can get your data, versus in the past, if you're doing a large keyword research project, like we did one when I was back in agency side in 2016, and we spent 3 weeks on keyword research. Again, if you go back a couple of years before, when I was at Razorfish, we were tracking around 50,000 keywords. Again, we spent probably a month with 2 full-time SEOs building out that keyword list. Again, that was across the insurance space. But the advantage of that is we could start to identify particular trends happening in the industry. We could watch new entrants into the market. We could even, obviously we were using Tableau at the time, and we could forecast where they would be in potentially 2 to 3 weeks. So we were able to give our agency clients heads up, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, these 2 or 3 websites are going to actually be ranking potentially on the first page. So, you need to be aware that if someone in your business Googles them, they're going to start seeing these particular competitors. And then we can start looking at their backlink profiles. We can see, they're doing a lot of paid link building. They're doing a lot of content development. We could then sort of guide our clients, a bit of a heads up versus, as I said, go back, several years before then, you just kind of had to wait a couple of days for some data to show up in Search Console or analytics. So I think a lot of people have the benefits now is they can get a lot of data from, tens of thousands of keywords within seconds. As I said, tools like Keyword Insights, you can drop your batch of keywords in, and a matter of minutes, they can do it classified into the various commercial intents. They can do keyword grouping. They can even check the actual, what page ranks and what competitors potentially showing up. So I think the advantage for a lot of SEOs these days is in a lot of markets, not all markets, because, smaller markets, I know we're doing keyword research in Asia or parts of Africa, that there's often a lot of missing data in a lot of these tools. So it's not a perfect world. It is still very much, focused on, I guess you would classify as the commercial intent, the commercial centers, so where the money is. That's where there's a lot of data. So, if you look in data availability in UK, it's very high. You look in data availability in France for a lot of the global tools, it's sometimes a bit lower. So I think that's a curveball that's thrown to some of the SEOs. You sometimes need to use multiple tools. So if you're doing keyword research in Japan or Korea, a lot of these tools will say there's no search volume. Because in fact, you definitely know that search is happening. So I think it's the fact that while there's a lot more data available, there's also a lot more potentially either false positives or there's multiple tools you have to use, such as, Systrix is based in Germany. They have a good reach across that particular country, geographic, there we are. But I know years ago we were using tools like Searchmetrics and we had no data for Belgium. Just, they didn't have it in their tool.
Yeah.
So I think there's been massive improvements in terms of availability, but there's still, spots in the world where, the tool just doesn't have enough data or the data is not accurate enough. And you can sometimes look at that. You can look at your Search Console, your Google Ads data, and compare it with third-party tools, and you're like, I'm pretty sure there's more than one person searching for our brand versus these tools say no one's searching for your brand. So I think that's also a big risk for a lot of people who are using these tools and maybe haven't grown up with the fact that data hasn't always existed. They take everything and accept it. Yeah. So I think whatever tool you're using, whether it's Google Ads, Search Console, any of the paid tools, you take all their data availability with a grain of salt. So I think that's the risk. And I think the biggest thing I've seen on that, years ago, we had a agency who quoted, they were building out a new page around, I think it was buying a second-hand car or selling a second-hand car. I forget which one it was. But that dropped in the Google Keyword Planner using Broad Match globally, and they'd come back with an estimate of like there's 70,000 clicks a month. We had another website in that same market which was ranking, and it was only driving like, I think it was like 3,500 impressions, and it was ranked, I think, number 4 or number 5. But again, it was one of those things, like they came to the business and said, we're going to drive you 70,000 clicks a month. Business is like, that's great. And they've come to me, it's like, can you validate the data? It's like, well, I can't, because you've obviously used broad match, because I know that term and I know we're ranking for that term, and it doesn't really drive that many impressions or even clicks. So yeah, so I think there's still a lot of mistakes that happen when people just rely on these tools and don't use some, I guess, common sense.
So the question then that sticks in my mind, which is just like a blatant, direct question I want to ask. What is the value of keywords then? And to add to that, how does one value keywords, especially when there isn't a search volume, either because you don't have it on Google Keyword Planner or on an external tool like the example you gave earlier with search metrics not having data or accurate or enough data set in Belgium, a specific country.
Yeah. Also, search metrics eventually did fix that, but it took several years. But I think the value of a keyword depends on your business. So if you're an e-commerce business, there's obviously a lot more value on keywords because you're typically driving commercial intent. If you're an informational business that's not monetizing the traffic, there's potentially less value on the keyword. The click is valuable, but the actual keyword. So if they came into the website saying, say for example, you're a tourism board. I'm looking at a picture of Netherlands on Google Images, which I was going to use for my virtual background. You're a tourism board in the Netherlands, like Holland.com, or Visit Holland, and you're wondering about keywords around, tulip colors. It's probably not a highly commercially driven query, but again, there's some relevance. So I think that's the thing. There's a relevance to your business. But in terms of if you rank for, colorful tulips, or what colors are tulips, or what colors can tulips grow, or what's my favorite color tulip, generally you don't care because it's more of the context around the traffic. So I think, don't know if context is the right word, but it's the intent is to promote your business or your company or country. And in terms of what the exact query drives into the website, you don't really care as long as the theme's okay. If you were looking at potentially, selling tulip seeds, tulip bulbs, then it's a whole different story. In terms of, you need to have a much more focus on, you're not interested about potentially, how long do tulips, bloom for, or, what's the best place to view tulips. You want to sell tulips. You look at the, as to, which is the longest lasting tulips, or which of the tulips best grown in cold climates or warm climates. Those might be commercially. So I think it's more so, it's focusing on the theme. And that's why I think typically the evolution of keywords is more looking about the theme of the keywords rather than the exact keywords, because you don't always have as much control on what keywords you rank for. So you build a page about tulip bulbs, Google might start sending you traffic around, tulip seeds, because people are looking for tulip seeds because they don't know tulip bulbs. It's not such a bad thing because, again, you focus on the core theme. So I think that's sort of one of the things which, when I talk with internal stakeholders, I say we try not to focus on keywords too much. We focus on the groups of keywords, and you try and focus on the theme of the keywords. So I said, if it's, how to remove mold, or, how to wash out ketchup stains from your clothes, the broader subset of keywords actually also drive more traffic. And I think that's sometimes a mistake a lot of businesses I've worked with in the past. We had one business when I was working in the agency that did payday loans, and they did not care about anything except the keyword payday loans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Payday loan applications, payday loan information, payday loan contact, they did not care. They had one single keyword. And the problem is it creates an elevated level of stress that there's a lot of fluctuation on some of these keywords. So all through the day, the keyword ranking would change from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 3 to 2 to 1. And you'd be a nervous wreck. So I think that's the key thing is, if you're looking at keywords, you want to look at general themes, because if you're too focused on a single keyword, you're just going to be a nervous wreck. And it's, you're setting unrealistic expectations, because there can be a lot of keywords around that. And again, I can't give the exact specifics, but one of our brands, if we look at the Google Ads reach, has around 77,000 keywords related to the core product. Another one of our brands has a couple of thousand. So, but again, if you focus on that one single keyword and you ignore the rest, because in some markets there's a lot of fragmentation in terms of the types of terms people use.
Yeah.
And I think, to loop back to the original question, if you're using tools such as social listening, you can sometimes identify those, because if you say, for example, COVID was a perfect one. A lot of businesses use the correct terminology COVID-19 when it came out, whereas consumers were using coronavirus. And I think back when it was like a 10 times to 100 times the volume, depending on the market. So if you use the correct scientific terminology, COVID-19, no consumers would look for you. And I mean, I did some tests with my travel site back then, and I think one day I rewrote a couple of press releases that travel sites have put out, just put them on my site with information that optimized the articles for COVID-19, optimized the articles for coronavirus. I think in one day I got like 25,000 visits to the website, just because I'd optimized for the term, what we'd say, the consumer-centric term. So I think that's a key thing that, and again, this goes back to this whole thing. If you're focused on a particular keyword and you're like, look, I need to rank for this keyword, I'm going to ignore everything else, and you get this sort of, tunnel vision, you're going to start missing out on opportunities. You'll potentially optimize for the wrong keywords. So I think the keyword as a concept, I think, as I said, you're right, it is sort of going away, but it's moving more into sort of, keyword themes and topics.
And this leads me to what I was thinking of over the weekend. I was looking into SGE and potentially how it could impact the entire industry. And I related it to, I thought of rather, the pandemic and how it impacted the travel industry, specifically the travel industry. I mean, you had a variety of clients or businesses rather, who had keywords in position 1, but the demand just wasn't there anymore. And it was almost just by overnight, the demand was just completely wiped away. And I thought to myself, okay, position 1, even if you're in position 1 or position 0, if you have a featured snippet, right?
Yeah.
If the demand isn't there, it really doesn't matter. So I'm thinking to myself, if SGE is released, right, and it's the more forefront or more prominent aspects of the SERPs, and it pushes rankings down, traditional rankings down, or even completely out of the way, what is the value of ranking in position 1 or position 0 anymore? I mean, would it really matter if you're in position 1, especially because business leaders focus so much on rankings? You hinted at it earlier. They have a fascinated viewpoint of what SEO is, and to them it's rankings. And I believe they think of rankings because they want to see themselves on Google, right? How are we going as SEOs going to navigate that?
So there's not a simple answer in terms of, I guess it depends how aggressively Google rolls out. But again, I guess, we've faced a lot of hurdles over the years. All of a sudden Google was showing ads above organic results. then shopping, and people are like, well, SEO is dead now because people no longer need SEO. Well, it's still kind of there, and it's still typically growing.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of things will evolve. When it comes to any of these, whether it's ChatGPT or search SGE, Google needs to source the data from somewhere. So it still needs to crawl your website. As I said, you may not capture the click, but again, it depends on your business model. If you're, a provider, like let's say you're Allianz Insurance. They popped up as a Google ad. And you search for car insurance, and then Google says, are you looking for, a car insurance policy suitable for, expats living in the Netherlands? Because again, Google's mined all its data, knows that, you're an expat, knows you're English speaking. You can say, well, yes, and then it can narrow it down. So I think, as I said, if you search for car insurance, there's 2 billion results. Who's going to look at 2 billion results? So I think it will be there'll be a lot of pruning. Again, if you're a website that monetizes through affiliate, you may struggle unless you have an offer. So you still have the opportunity to potentially show up, but you need to have something, an added value, for Google to show you. But I don't think Google wants to do away with the web because that's what their model's built on. Whereas I guess other parties, whether it's Facebook or TikTok, the web is not their primary channel. Their primary channel is apps. So Google's primary channel is web. So I don't see Google making a massive change in the business model. Again, there's billions of dollars in revenue. A stake, I don't think they want to upset that. But also, I think, consumer behavior, because you think how long it took for people to get used to Google. And, various things like ChatGPT and stuff, they're interesting to people who are usually a bit more technically advanced. But to, if you put that type of thing in front of my parents, I'd probably curse the computer because I just want the results. It's the same thing with, I remember you go out drinking or whatever. Stopped drinking several years ago, but you're talking to people and stuff, and they're like, oh, I hate SEO. I run a small business on Etsy and I can't rank. I'm pushed down by this random affiliate site that resells my product. You're like, oh. So generally, it's always been the case that, people, and it comes back to a test we did years ago with some people who had vision impairment. They scroll past, and this was an internal test within a website because they had native ads. So this is not a Google example, but this is a website example, because they knew the top couple of results were sponsored. So people's behavior, the same thing now, people who are a bit more technically savvy will often scroll down a bit further because they'll assume the top couple of results are ads. So I think it will take a while for people's sort of behavior to change. As I said, the websites need to feed into these AI tools because that's where they get the data from. And I think it's the type of thing that, and maybe that's the thing that's missing, is the feedback loop. So what types of questions is Google getting? And Google kind of did this. They partly rolled out the FAQ model. I think they did it in India and the US, where they would feed information back to websites. What frequently asked questions they couldn't answer that you could actually create content around. So I think that the key part is Google needs to start feeding back to businesses on what types of questions are happening within these AI tools that they don't have up-to-date information, or people have flagged the information as incorrect, that websites need to update and address. So I think there's a bit of a lag in terms of the analytics and insights. And I think even Bing said they'd release some data, I think in July or something like that, within Bing Webmaster Tools on how people are using it. And I don't think it's been rolled out yet. So there's a bit of a lag. I think a lot of consumer behavior will take a long while because people have habits. You Google stuff. But again, remember, if you're Googling on your mobile device, Google will often pick the first result, which is the number one organic result. So there's more incentive to be ranked in the top couple.
Are you a fan of public organic click-through rate figures? It's changed over the years.
I think they have their place. Yeah, they definitely have their place where you don't have the data available and you have to estimate stuff, or if you're trying to estimate potentially competitors. We built our own internal model based on our own data, but again, that can also be further refined. But you also start to notice weird things. So if you have a small traffic website, the click-through rate figures are going to be all over the place. It also depends on the brand, non-brand. Because if you have a website that, it's 10% branded traffic, the click-through rate curve is probably fairly accurate, versus another website where a majority of the traffic is branded, your click-through rate is probably overestimated. So there's definitely some grounds for using public data. And again, it's one of those things that, the larger the data set, the more accurate typically things are, because you iron out some of the outliers.
By the way, do you normally click organic results specifically? Say if you Google something, would you look for the organic result and click on it? Or do you click on paid ads just out of curiosity?
I think I'll check. Again, if the paid ad answers the query better, because sometimes, if I'm looking for a very specific thing, and a few people have been talking about this on Twitter lately, the SEO Twitter, that the homepage is sort of showing up for some long, sort of high volume search terms that typically shouldn't be, obviously with the site links and stuff. But for very specific queries, sometimes Google Ads does give you the answer quicker, even if you see an organic result. But often you only really know you've sometimes clicked on it if you're not paying attention, when you actually look if there's a Google Click ID attached to the URL. So I think there's definitely, again, it's a laziness thing. So if you're in a hurry, you might just click whatever. If you've got a bit more time, you're probably more likely maybe to click a couple of the organic results. And again, that's one of the things. You think about how you use Google, you'll potentially open 2 or 3 tabs. Consumers are likely doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's the interesting aspect of, you have one impression, you have 2 or 3 clicks generated. So is the click-through rate now 300%?
Yeah, it's interesting. I as an SEO, I never click on ads ever. Like
You've
literally,
never clicked on a competitor's ad. You've never clicked on a competitor's ad.
I always, if it's thinking of it now, literally, I always go away from ads and then decide which I click on instinctively.
I mean, I've accidentally clicked on my own ads before when I've worked in a business, because you're doing research or whatever, and you open something, so
I think I may have clicked.
But again, it's the focus. It's if you're in a rush, you're not really.
The last time I remember specifically clicking on an ad, and this was by mistake, was when they changed the layout of it. It used to be a different color, and then they changed it to just say ad, right? And that transition, there was a period where I clicked on it and I was like, this isn't what I was looking for. It just, I don't know, and I'm wondering whether it's because I'm an SEO or whether non-SEOs, just a traditional or an ordinary searcher, clicks on organic, or whether they care or notice.
Well, I know the old stat was, I think it was around 15 to 20% of all clicks will happen on paid. So majority of people will never click on paid. And there will be certain people, and I remember I was speaking with a stakeholder a couple months ago, and like you, he said he'll never click on a Google ad. He'll go out of his way. But again, it depends what you're looking for. So if you're looking for, as an e-commerce theme type of query, so you're looking at, iPhone covers, or you're looking at Samsung chargers, a majority is going to be paid. You're going to have the shopping results, you're going to have the sponsor results. So I think it's the type of query you're doing. Sometimes it's just really hard to avoid clicking on the paid stuff. And particularly on mobile devices, there's less space.
Yeah. With click-through rate figures, you mentioned you use an internal one. I'm curious, is it because did you build an internal one for more accurate data, or specifically because the public ones were not as accurate as you anticipated? Because if they've changed over the years, right?
I think the first version, I think we probably used Advanced Web Ranking has a reasonable click-through rate study. So I would definitely check their website out for it. But I think the first version is we just went with, because we didn't have the data available, we used I think Advanced Web Ranking. And I think we're in the process of fine-tuning it. But it's also, when you start looking at your own data, there can be a lot of outliers. Because again, it depends on the amount of brand, non-brand. It depends on the strength of your brand. So as I said, if you're looking at building a click-through rate for, Dave's Travel versus Airbnb, Airbnb obviously is a much, much stronger brand, and potentially their click-through rate curve could be significantly better than what, tools like Advanced Web Ranking estimate. It's a tough one, because I think the key thing is you don't want to overestimate it. Because if you go back to stakeholders and you forecast that, click-through rate's going to be, 80%. And I've seen that. I've worked on websites where, for generic queries, they were such a strong brand in the local market, they saw, 70 or 80% click-through rates on generic terms. It's some of the websites I've worked in the past, basically, 50% of the country would visit the website on a monthly basis. If not more. So the click-through rate curves in those businesses are just off the chart. So then for some of those, again, you need to do the non-brand kind of view of it, and potentially even need to do it by country, or do it by even section of the website. So as I said, you talked about the affiliate stuff. If you're really dominant, in the affiliate space selling, tax software, and then you'll start offering software, for, payments, your click-through rate may not be as strong. So I think for bigger sites, you almost need to start looking at a category level click-through rate if you want to do it properly. And again, all that data is freely available in Search Console. And also remember, Google has the bulk export, where you can actually pipe the data directly from Google Ads into BigQuery. Which give you a couple of things. It gives you much more accurate data. You get a lot more data. It doesn't require a third-party tool. But you also get a lot of fun extra things. So you get rich snippets. So when your results showed up, was there a rich snippet available? Or did you show for a rich snippet? So I think, some of those tools available, weren't available several years ago. I would say just look at your own data and kind of see how it compares, because, again, it's probably better to slightly underestimate, because if you promise a business 1,000 extra visits for an e-commerce site and you're selling the conversion rates, 4%, and you drove 100, they're going to be pretty disappointed. If you promise them 100 and you drive them 300, they're going to be happy. So again, it's typically you want to sort of under-promise and over-deliver. Because no one's going to give you a pat on the back for falling short of your traffic forecast by 80 or 90%, because you were overestimating things to make things look pretty, or you're trying to make things more enticing. So I think no one wins by fudging the numbers to make things look better than they actually are.
If a stakeholder who's very much keyword focused and SEO is looking to move away from keywords and report more on performance of pages, equity pages, or commercial pages, however one wants to phrase it, how would you go about persuading the stakeholder to move away from focusing so much on individual keyword ranking data?
For some stakeholders, it'll never change. So I think it's good to sort of have some type of hybrid approach where you track one or two keywords and say, yes, this is an important thing for you, okay, but the general reporting we'll do on is focus on the basket of keywords, because I think that's when you get less volatility. and you'll get potentially less influence, personalization, yada, yada, yada. So I think some stakeholders, they will want, and we do have stakeholders I work with, they're interested in 5 or 10 keywords. That's all they focus on. But if we can also show the basket of keywords, which is sort of what consumers are using, because again, your business doesn't focus around one keyword, unless you're a payday loan provider. There's a lot of other keywords out there which actually will drive traffic. And I think that's the core thing. Are you doing the rankings for vanity reasons, or are you doing them for the purpose of driving more business to the website? And for the purpose of vanity reasons, okay. But ideally, you should be doing it SEO for the purpose of, as I said, driving that basket of keywords, benefiting the whole business rather than just one individual product or one individual service. It's example, like you look at something like, as an Airbnb. If Airbnb just focused on San Francisco, that might have been great. They might have made a lot of money, but their business would hit a cap. And I think that's the second part to it. You can also show them, while you've got one keyword that drives 1,000 searches a month, you've got an extra 5,000 keywords which are driving 10,000 potential visits a month. So are they going to choose to ignore all the rest of it just for the focus on that one keyword? And look at their Google Ads campaign. You know they're probably buying thousands of keywords. So if they're happy to do it for Google Ads, why are they happy to do it for SEO?
It's more direct with paid. With SEOs, it's a guessing game.
It is, but it's the two should align. So your general search strategy between paid and organic shouldn't be too far removed from each other. I mean, obviously, there's certain keywords that you can never rank for because you don't have that content on your website. But there's also certain keywords you can't buy for commercial reasons or legal reasons, such as worked in the infant nutrition space, and there were certain keywords that we could not buy because there's an agreement with the WHO on fair marketing practices, and there's certain keywords you just cannot buy. And same thing with Google. In certain countries, there's certain products that you cannot buy your product name or your service. Even looking parts of Middle East, if you're buying keywords, I guess talking about LGBTQ or any of those areas, that's a high risk for your business. To actively buy those keywords, and it can be the case in some parts of Asia. Google prevents you from buying certain keywords because there's local rules and regulations. So there's definitely a balanced strategy between the two. There's often the situation where you have to do SEO in some of those situations because Google or local markets won't allow, for valid reasons, those keywords to be purchased.
Now, David, in the months ahead, I'm sure we're going to see massive changes in the SERPs, especially when SGE...
Hopefully not too much. Hopefully not too much. I want to push that to 2024.
I'm anticipating a revolutionary change in the SERPs. Are you anticipating any massive changes? Let's say if you owned a ranking tool, right, and your business is to provide ranking data, whether a small, mid, or enterprise level tool, what would you be anticipating in the months ahead?
Well, I think the general thing, as I said, with the all the AI stuff, there's going to be a lot more personalization or account level results. So in terms of you did the query today, tomorrow you might get a completely different answer. So I think there's going to be a lot more volatility. I think it's an interesting one because I think in some ways Google needs these tools because they need SEOs to clean up and improve the experience for organic users. So I think it's kind of a balance. I know there's been a lot of tools that have caused themselves a lot of problems, blocked in Google and, all sorts of commercial issues. But again, it depends where the data's sourced. If the data's sourced through, whether it's Chrome plugins and stuff and bought through ISPs, there's nothing Google can really do. So again, I guess it depends on where the data that they use is sourced from. Again, I've got no inside knowledge. Any of the tools that I chat with are very, very, very protective of where that data comes from. I think you might see a bit more fluctuation in terms of what you see in the results versus what you see maybe in Search Console. But for a lot of businesses, there's no real option. So as I said, you want to expand your affiliate marketplace, and you want to grow into headphones, but you don't have any content at the moment. The only way to source that, you can't get that data through Search Console. The only way to source that is through third-party tools or Google Ads. So I think for a lot of businesses, there's no option right now to gather some of that data. And even, if Google wanted to be, really aggressive about that, they could switch on a paid API into Google Ads and give you that data for free. Well, not for free, but, through a paid service. But, trying to use, the Google Ads API has its massive limitations as well. In terms of what you can use it for, you can't use it for, rank tracking software that's sold commercially. So I think you will see a bit more fluctuations. Maybe some of the bigger providers may struggle with scale, because again, the expectations, because as I said, you're expanding your business. You want to get more coverage in Nigeria. You want to expand it in South Africa. And you look at some of these tools and they don't really cover those regions, or they don't have that as a data set. So I think there'll be growth of some of the more regional players, which we have seen in Eastern Europe. So I was at Brighton last year, and there was a couple of providers which were based in Poland, which will focus purely on Eastern Europe, because that's what they do. And again, a perfect example, years ago, I couldn't crawl one of my sites in Belarus, because it used a Cyrillic, which SEMrush broke. SEMrush couldn't check it. So, even the big tools have limitations in some of these markets. The same thing, SEMrush doesn't sell their tool to Russian businesses. So I think there's definitely going to be more regional players, which should hopefully help with some of the niche data. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Is probably going to be more cost to SEOs in terms of you may need more subscriptions. But also I think for some SEOs, they might get a bit more aggressive. An example from a couple of years ago is one of my businesses. This is when I was back at Danone. I didn't know they had full access to my SEMrush account, and they increased the amount of keywords they're tracking from, I think it was 1,000 to like 5,000. The amount of estimated traffic only doubled. So by increasing your cost by 5-fold, your actual insight hasn't really changed significantly. So I think that's the other thing, that potentially some of the SEOs will start maybe just taking a tougher look at their what keywords they're tracking. And, even from a ranking perspective, daily data for a lot of businesses is not a high value unless you're changing things. So if you're a news website, yes, for sure. But as I said, if you're a general kind of content website where you haven't updated your content in a couple of years and you only add 1 or 2 articles maybe every 6 months, for a lot of smaller sites, they don't need, daily rank tracking. And that sort of, as I said, we use tools like Rank Ranger because we don't need to check the data daily. And, obviously that significantly reduces the amount of cost. We can track more keywords, it's more cost effective. So I think people will probably start to get a bit smarter. And potentially start, as I said, using some of the regional tools to fill gaps where the bigger tools don't have that data set available. And how do you see it? Are you seeing it kind of like everyone's going to go out, move to enterprise tools or do it yourself?
I think the enterprise tools have an advantage in that they will most likely be forefront in informing SEOs of the changes. And in a sense, I'm personally relying on them to say, okay, SGE, let's say it's the equivalent of 5 position 0 in the SERPs, right? Excuse me. I'm relying on those enterprise tools to essentially say, okay, these are the changes we're seeing. This is how we navigate them in order to inform stakeholders, clients, etc. I am a keen proponent of SEOs moving away from having keywords prominent in reports. You hinted at it earlier. Having it within reporting, I don't think is a bad thing, but I think it's so prominent these days. And I do believe it's devalued over time. And stakeholders, business leaders tend to stick with it like it's literally every single keyword that they think is valuable. They want to know the performance of them, sometimes on a daily basis, which is just nonsensical. But they believe that because of us SEOs, we've trained non-SEOs to business leaders specifically to think in that manner. And I think that we should be moving far away from that and focusing on performance of pages. If we want to show one or two keywords or a group of keywords after that, almost like a secondary page or alongside the page as the main view, that's fine. But move away from keywords as a prominent thing. My interest in this approach would be, okay, how does this impact those tools, enterprise level and otherwise? How does this impact their business? I don't think they're going to go away. I think they themselves will have to shift. And I have a theory, not a strong one right now, but my theory is that they themselves will focus more on reporting on pages, i.e. saying to SEOs, these are equity pages because of X, Y, and Z. And this is what we should be focusing on in terms of reporting. So I think they'll most likely shift that way. However they shift, after, and I think SGE will be the mark in the sand that says, okay, this is now the new Google or the new SERPs. However they change, I think SEOs will be relying on them to spread this information to the industry.
Yeah, so I believe the view of page level, I mean, that's sort of the path I'm going down. So, I think there's relevance there. But again, it also means you need to understand a lot more about, and again, keywords, or you said tools like Keyword Insight, are a great way to classify your existing content. Where does that sit in that particular, part of the funnel? Is it in obviously if you use tools like Google Analytics, is it a highly converting page? Does it some attribution? So does it lead to conversions elsewhere on the website? So I think that type of stuff is definitely the right sort of path to go down. As to the over-reliance on reporting, I think it's the case that, and this is when I get asked by some markets on reporting, it's like, well, have you changed anything? Have you done anything? If if we've actively updated, fixed SEO tickets, yada, 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 added content, yes, but if fundamentally nothing's changed, there's no real need to do some deep level reporting. You can look at some year-on-year stuff, how you're tracking, but generally there's no requirements for deep level reporting, and you should be automating it. That's the other thing. Any of the reporting, it should be automated because, I remember the old days of working the agency, and you'd spend 1 or 2 weeks doing reporting every month. So those 1 or 2 weeks you couldn't actually do SEO. And I mean, I've poked fun at a lot of agencies on this, but hey, it's now the 20th of the month. Time to get last month's report in Excel. So, it's that type of stuff that, just doesn't really kind of make sense. But no, I have to head off to join another meeting. But appreciate the invite today and very, very cool questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Lastly, where can people find you online?
They can usually find me ranting on Twitter. I've actually started playing around with YouTube Shorts, but mainly for my travel stuff, like weird things like people on escalators and trains pulling in and out of stations and taking off and landing. So my YouTube channel seems to be gaining a bit of traction, weirdly. But yeah, typically on Twitter is probably the best channel. And again, I won't accept all LinkedIn connections unless we've had some type of social interaction, ideally on Twitter. So yeah, I would say Twitter's probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. I'll have the link in the description. Thank you so much, David. I know you got to run off, so we'll end here. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.